Hey, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a build I'm particularly excited about. This is a Death Blight Knight build using the Eclipse Shotel. For this build, we're going to have 40 points into Vigor, 24 into Endurance, only 20 in Dexterity, but we do have the Prosthesis Wearer Heirloom Talisman, which gives us an extra 5, and then we have level 30 Faith, but we do have the Halig Knight Helm, which gives us another 2 points in Faith. Since this weapon does use both Dex, Faith, and a little bit of strength scaling, having bonuses in both Faith and Dexterity is going to be helpful. As for the rest of the armor, we'll be wearing the Tree Sentinel armor, which gives us 103 poise with the Bullgoat Talisman. We'll also be using Tree's Favor +2, which gives us HP, Stamina, and Equip Load boost. And then we'll be using the Carrion Filigree Crest Talisman, which lowers the FP consumed by skills. So this means when we use our Ash of War, it's not going to use quite as much FP, which is useful since we only have 10 Mind on this build. As for the tiers, we'll be using the Faith Knot Crystal tier and the Crimson Bubble tier. There are a couple different ways you could set this up. The Faith Knot Crystal tier is decent because it gives you extra scaling in Faith, but you could also use the Leaden Hard tier or the Dexterity Knot tier, as well as the Holy Shrouding Crack tier. However, we don't necessarily want to maximize the damage output with these weapons, and we'll touch on that more later. For this build is pretty straightforward. It's the dual curved swords moveset, so you get the multiple attacks when you do the running L1 and the jumping L1, which I recommend delaying a little bit just so that the hitbox is closer to the ground and closer to your enemy when you go for it. The first two parts of the hitbox can be a little bit high in the air, so it's nice if you delay it and get all the hitboxes kind of low to the ground. This does have kind of a cool backstep attack, which is a little bit different, I believe, but nothing crazy. And then you may be using the two-handed weapon occasionally, but it's, pretty much the same for just the curved sword moveset. So nothing crazy there, but then the Ash of War is kind of what we're going to be focused on with this build. So we do have this first part, which just puts the Death Flare on the blade, and then we also have the two part where you press L2 once and then again and make an explosion. So once this buff is applied, we do start applying Death Blight every hit we land, and that's going to be kind of the thing that we're going for, is going to be Death Blighting our opponent, but you'll see it's not always practical. It's worth noting that the amount of Blight buildup that you get from that follow-up explosion is going to be very significant. You might be able to blight your opponent in 2 or 3 of those explosions, whereas if you're landing lots and lots of hits with just the regular buffed attacks, it might take quite a bit longer. So we'll see throughout the course of the invasions just how practical blighting your opponent is, especially with only the Eclipse Shotel. For higher level builds, you could be using something like Fia's Mist or Death Lightning, but you need pretty specific stats that are pretty high, so I didn't opt for that. I went for a lower level build, but if you do have the extra stats, it's worth looking into that, I would say. That pretty much covers everything I wanted to say about the build and the moveset, so feel free to go ahead and jump ahead to the invasions. However, if you would like to stick around, I am looking to get 1,000 subscribers. I get some money back from YouTube when I hit that count, so if you wouldn't mind subscribing, that would be awesome, but obviously you can do whatever you want. But yeah, let's just go ahead and jump into the invasions. Alright, so this first invasion is going to be kind of best case scenario. We had a small space with 2 people, neither of them were doing a ton of damage. The Phantom was using Endure, and the host had a lot of health. So here you can kind of see I'm starting to get my buffs on, and person with Endure is great because I'm able to get in a lot of hits without doing too much damage, which kind of sounds counterintuitive, but when you're going for the Blight buildup, it's really kind of the approach that you need to take. So I am able to land some hits. Obviously I haven't blighted anybody yet, but my opponent, the Phantom here, keeps using Endure, which means some of the damage is being negated, and I am able to get more of their blight meter high up. So I'm kind of just trying to make sure that my swords are buffed continuously. If I'm able to, I'll try to get the Ash of War off the full part, but here we can see I was able to get enough quick hits in on that Phantom to get the first Blight kill here, and even though I didn't really land too many of the follow-ups to the Ash of War, that motion that you saw right there, just getting a lot of hits in is going to do the trick, especially if they're, pretty fast. And when you're in a small space like this and you're not doing too much damage because of Endure, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. But you can see here that I'm going for the host, but you're going to see me reset to neutral or just completely back off quite a bit. Sometimes I'll heal when I have a lot of health already, and this is usually just trying to encourage the opponent to heal, because the approach that you need to take, if you're just going to be using the Eclipse Shuttles, you either want them to not do a lot of damage and just build up Blight if you're only facing one person, but if you're facing multiple opponents, you're probably going to want them to be doing a lot of damage, and they do actually do quite a bit of damage. So I would say they're not like unviable for PvP. They're not even as buffed as they could be here. I could be using like the Holy Crack Shrouding tier or something. So there's ways to get quite a bit of damage out of these, but eventually I am able to just kind of chase down the opponent, keep an eye on their health, and get the Blight bar all the way to the top on that first one. So that was, I think, the only 2v1 where I got Blight buildup on both the host and the Phantom, and I think a big part of that was the fact that the Phantom was using Endure. In a kind of a chaotic situation like the one you're seeing right now, it's really kind of the best approach, in my opinion, to be taking advantage of the higher damage you get from the Eclipse Shuttles to just kind of wear down your opponent's health until it's a one-on-one situation. So in this situation, I'm really trying to just use the damage output of these weapons to at least get rid of one Phantom, if not both. If I were to Blight any of them, that would be a bonus, but I think in kind of the spirit of this weapon as a whole, you can't just be going for Blight buildup, kind of as fun as it is. You could, change your build and use unleveled weapons. So I have seen some videos on YouTube of people who might have a Eclipse Shuttle that's +6 in their right hand and then +0 in their left, just so it doesn't do quite as much damage and they can hit their opponent more often. But that's not really great for like a 3v1, which you might encounter if you're invading. I mean, if you wanted to get like 4 Eclipse Shuttles and have 2 that were maxed out in terms of the level for your range, and then another 2 that had, no extra damage scaling, you could do that. I only had 2, and it didn't really feel like within the spirit of the weapon to be hard swapping to something that's unupgraded, but that's totally something you can do. And if you really just want to do the Blight buildup with this particular weapon, that would be a way to do it. It's just not what I did here. So you'll be seeing kind of this as a full showcase of the weapon using, the damage output. It's not always going to be buffed, but in every single invasion, if I got it to a one-on-one, I would definitely go for the Blight buildup until I was out of FP. And you'll see that'll kind of look funny in circumstances like here. I think the host just kind of gave up, so I just started applying my buff. It was kind of a good test, so we got 2 full Ashes of War off and then 1 hit with the Eclipse Shuttle after it was buffed, so that kind of gives you an indicator of how much Blight you actually need to build up before you're going to Blight your opponent. And it's slow for sure. I think it's something that goes away slowly, but it builds up pretty slowly as well. So, for another build, for a higher level build, you might want to include something like Fia's Mist or Death Lightning, because those 2 things do build it up, but they have pretty high stat requirements. I think Fia's Mist is going to require a decent amount of intelligence, and the Death Lightning, I think, requires like 37 faith or something, or maybe even 47, a pretty high faith requirement. So, if you're running this build at level 200, you're probably not going to have any issues with it. But for the range that I like to invade at, I thought it made sense to just kind of stick to the requirements that are necessary for just the shuttle, and also kind of showcase the style of play that you're going to need to use if you go for this. So this invasion was kind of funny. There was a red that was really really aggressive, I would say. And so I just eventually think I need to parry this guy. So I go for the shield swap and the weapon swap over to the Misericorde, because I'm pretty sure that if I don't do something about the host quickly, the red there is just going to kill me with their Ashes of War. I don't know if they'd be trying to, but they were just, not really paying attention to my position, or didn't really care if they killed me in the process. So I would say sometimes that's going to be a reason to change your play style and maybe just kind of adjust accordingly. So this next one is it starts as a 2v1. We have one opponent that's sending a lot of magic at me, and that's the host. And then we have a phantom that's got a Zweihander that they're one-handing, and I think they might have a parry tool, like a dagger in their offhand, but they're not using it too much. They also don't have a ton of health, so I'm definitely getting chipped by the magic. Definitely, if you've been watching any of my videos, it's not one of my favorite spells. I think it would be nice if everything was strafable, but I'm going to digress there and just say that I start going for the Phantom here just with the raw damage. I don't really bother to buff. The buff does significantly increase your damage output though, so if you can buff, even if you're not going to try to get the full Blight buildup, just if it is a useful way to increase the damage output, especially if you put it on both. So I do kill the Phantom, but then we have a blue that hops in. I was using the staircase, I think, pretty effectively. It had a railing that was about the same height as the spell. So I do get a backstab here, which is nice. That Charge Forth Ash of War is not the... It does make you susceptible to backstabs, I would say. So once I start getting hit by the magic again, I decide to jump down, and my plan is to kind of just repeat the process, wait till I'm getting hit by magic again. Well, ideally not hit, but wait for it to start coming my way, and then I'll go over to the stairway again with that banister that really is kind of nice in terms of blocking this spell. So I decide that I have enough health to get the last hits on the blue to and just kind of tank the damage that I'm getting from the host here. And now it's a one-on-one situation, or so I hope. So I go for the Blight attack here, the Ash of War that adds quite a bit of Blight buildup, and I managed to hit it once, but not the second time. It's worth noting that that full Ash of War, pressing L2 twice, does significant. It does require significant FP. So having higher mind on this build wouldn't be a bad idea, but if you are frequently killing people and have a couple flasks in your offhand just to for blue juice, that is definitely a good approach. So I kill a second blue, a third Phantom, and now it's finally just a one-on-one with the host, and I think, okay, now I'm ready to blight my opponent, but they just have no health, and I pretty much one-shot them with just running L1. So that was something that came up a lot in this build, and I think I would be remiss to not include it, is just you run the risk of killing your opponent, and you're kind of playing chicken with how many hits can I get in with the Blight without killing my opponent to get an increase in the Blight buildup. So it's definitely kind of a challenge. I found myself kind of doing things that I normally wouldn't do, like just totally letting my opponent heal. It's kind of the same play style that you might have if you're practicing parries or something, where really you're trying to achieve one thing and it's a little bit silly, and you're not playing your hardest in some instances. And I, to kind of showcase the weapon, I definitely felt like I needed to get some Blight buildup kills, and some cases I think it was useful. Like the Ash of War is strong and does a decent amount of damage. I don't even have Shard of Alexander on here, and it still hits for at least 300 at this weapon level. But here I have an opponent. It's just a one-on-one. I land one of the Ashes of War. I think they started weapon swapping, somehow ended up with no weapon in their right hand, and I am able to get Blight buildup on them. So definitely felt good, but it's a one-on-one situation where I do back off at times and really going for a specific goal that's maybe a little bit silly. I'd be very interested to know how other people have used this weapon too, and just in conjunction with other Deathblight spells, is it more viable to get Deathblight kills that are not at the expense of just kind of your effort. Like, can you be fully aggressive the entire time and get Deathblight kills with a fully upgraded Eclipse Shotel and upgraded spells and everything, or does just the damage associated with this stuff really consistently result in no Deathblight buildup? So I don't know. It's definitely an interesting build, and one that ever since I picked up the Eclipse Shotel and learned that you could apply Deathblight, like I wanted to make a build around it. There were some early on there were some issues with it. I think Fire's Deadly Sin, if you use that, you can apply Deathblight just by being in proximity. So that got patched at some point. And that was kind of how I knew about the Eclipse Shotel. So we're far enough into Elden Ring for it to be like, I think this weapon is where From Software wants it. So I don't really feel too bad about using it. But it is also kind of interesting, like the lengths to which people will go to not get Deathblighted. I think there's like potentially some humiliation involved with it. To me, it's like, if you get Deathblighted, it's just kind of a funny way to die. But some people will like, jump off a cliff or something when they realize that they might get Deathblighted soon, or just kind of end the fight in a way that isn't Deathblight. So I don't know, like I've definitely got killed by it before. The Eclipse Shotel is something you don't see in PvP a ton, so I think not everybody even knows about the follow-up attack that comes after you just put the weapon buff on. So I've definitely been in circumstances where I've been kind of keeping an eye on my Blight bar, and then I will get hit by the Ash of War because I don't even know there's a second part to it, and that will be enough to blight me. So it is interesting in terms of like what people's familiarity with it is, and like how willing they are to just kind of avoid it or not. I think you'll see some play styles where people just kind of ignore the Deathblight and or maybe don't even recognize that particular status bar as being Deathblight. It's not something, if you're unfamiliar with the weapon, you might just assume that you can't blight people to death. So this other invasion is, it started out, I think, as a 2v1. At least one other blue came in, and now there's another blue. And this one, like, they are a good candidate from the fact that they don't have a lot of armor on, so their Deathblight armor, or Deathblight buildup is going to be a smaller bar, so they're more likely to get blighted quickly, but they had like 700 HP or 900 or something, so they just died so quickly. And that's kind of the thing about this, like your damage output is going to be even higher if they don't have armor, but they are also going to be blighted more quickly. So I think it's just kind of an interesting balance to face. And here is another instance where I really wanted to get the Deathblight kill on this person. They didn't have a ton of HP, so like it probably would have been the play to switch to another Eclipse Shotel that just didn't have any upgraded to it, because every time I hit this person, it was doing like maybe half their health, and they weren't like healing too aggressively, even though I was trying to give them space. You also want to hit them, as frequently as possible in quick succession as possible. So once they heal, you want to hit them immediately after to keep that blight bar high. And it was just kind of a weird way to approach PvP. It's also worth noting that like you are gonna do a decent amount of damage with these, but it's not really a setup that I'd recommend for just a meta build. The blight buff doesn't last long enough for it to be like consistently used. Like Cragblade, I think, was up to 60 seconds for how long the buff lasts, and I'm not 100% sure how long this one is, so maybe it's just incorrect of me to say that it's not 60 seconds, but it definitely felt like it went away quickly and that I was reapplying it often. And also, needing to reapply it to two weapons just means that the FP consumption is higher, the amount of time spent buffing your weapon is higher, and if you're in a 3v1, it's not often practical to get off two weapon buffs, especially if your opponents are pretty aggressive and you're trying to heal or something. So it was like, if you could get 1 or 2 kills from phantoms very quickly right after you buff at the beginning, you know, that's definitely good. But if you're facing like kind of a long drawn out fight that you can face with more meta builds, it can be pretty difficult to use this setup effectively. So that's probably why you don't really see it in PvP too often. I think when you do, it's people going for something pretty specific. But I'd also be curious to know what the community thinks in terms of just more Death Blight weapons, what they might look like. And if you would like to see something with kind of a lower damage output, but maybe a higher blight buildup, or would that just kind of upset people too much? Like, I think it's a pretty fun play style if you don't really need to worry about killing your opponent from anything else but the Death Blight. I think like I would certainly enjoy a weapon that was you know, not that strong, had a decent amount of blight buildup. So your opponent would have to kind of change their play style to really avoid more hits. But I would also understand the argument that because you can get hit while rolled with status proc buildup, that it's like we're not in a place to accept more blight weapons. And I think that's totally fair too. Like being able to be status procced while you have iframes kind of makes it silly, especially for blight, I would say. And that was an approach that I took as well, like trying to time my running attacks so that they'd land when my opponent had iframes, so that I would apply more status but not hit them with damage. And that also felt like a pretty silly thing to do. But yeah, I mean, overall, like this is a cool build that I had a lot of fun with. And I guess more of my videos are frequently like commentary on what I'm trying to do, and this has kind of been a back and forth between what I'm trying to do in these invasions, but also you know, just kind of my thoughts about Deathblight and this weapon in general. I think it's fun though, and I'm not sure if there's too much content about it out there right now. Maybe for good reason, and I'm not sure, like I might get some hate for making this type of build, because I know there is some kind of silliness and it's borderline unsportsmanship when it comes to the strategy you have to employ to get the blight buildup. I would say it does require some skill to like navigate the amount of buildup you're doing versus the amount of damage you're doing, and also like try to have a lot of damage under certain circumstances and not a lot of damage in other circumstances. So like I found it to be difficult. I definitely died a lot in the process, but it's, you know, I'm not showcasing you know, some of the mechanical skills of Elden Ring in the way that I might for a different build video. Like I think I went for some backstabs occasionally in that clip earlier. I went for you know, a hard swap to parry shield and hard swap to Misericorde, which is like, you know, a skill that I'm trying to get better at. But there's not so much of that in this type of like build play style. It doesn't like warrant that type of stuff as much. And there were definitely some gank situations where I was like, I'm not going to get a kill with this setup. Like a couple moon veils and maybe some cross naginatas, and just like the kind of Mimi dual curved sword setup that I'm running is not going to do well against it. So I don't know. This has definitely been interesting. I'm curious how the community feels. This was just kind of a nice moment here where I get the 57 damage blight buildup, so totally unnecessary, but still fun. And like I think I learned a lot going into this build, and I will probably make another one of these build videos, maybe a higher level one with involving some more of the blight buildup type spells and weapons. So I like blight is interesting, and I would love to see, you know, more content creators talk about it, use it. Just the whole PvP scene surrounding it, you know, is somewhat lacking. I would say there's definitely, I would love to just see more stuff about it, and that's kind of all there is to it. So I'll do my part and probably use a similar build again in the future, maybe something higher level. But it was just kind of interesting. And I think it's a cool feature of the Souls game in general, is to just have something that instantly kills you if it gets too high. But that's just me. I know the first time I encountered basilisks in Dark Souls 1, it completely caught me off guard. I had no idea what the status bar meant. I had no idea why they weren't doing any damage. And it was like very confusing, and then I just instantly died. So I think from a Souls experience, that's kind of cool. It's super unique to have in a video game, and I find to be really fun. So if you can be employing that tactic, kind of the same thing as the basilisk, I think it's interesting and very within the ethos of Souls games in general. So I'm going to go back to what's going on currently, and this was kind of a silly invasion, which was, I'm not sure if it started a 3v1 or a 2v1, but essentially we have some use of consumables. We have somebody with a twin blade that goes for a lot of the giant hunt Ash of War. So I kind of switch off between who I'm attacking, and that was kind of to my detriment. But then at a certain point, I decide I'm really going to focus on the Phantom with the twin blade and the shield, and that ends up, I think, being the play. And now that it's a one-on-one, it's a little bit more manageable. And the host is Rune Arc, so I am hopeful that they're going to have a little bit more HP. So here I go for what I was hoping was going to be a trade with the Ash of War follow-up attack with the large explosion of Death Blight. And that was not effective because I got giant hunted, but it does have some element of hyper armor to it, and that's also why I recommend using a high poise build. Is just having a little bit more poise in these certain circumstances are going to be really helpful. But eventually I am able to get the Deathblight build up there, so that was definitely a solid invasion. This next one was a 2v1 that was kind of interesting, one of those ones where we have somebody in full Melania armor and somebody with the Bloody Helix, and the Phantom there does have the Moon Veil, which is kind of scary. So I figure I might just go for a parry here and see if I can get it into a 2v1. And I'm able to bait them into a heavy attack with the Moon Veil and get the follow-up there and just kind of switch back to my original setup. So this is something I'm trying to incorporate more into my playstyle, is just in scenarios where I think a parry would be pretty helpful, to just make sure I have the hard swap skills to do it. I know some people will hard swap the parry shield into their main hand and then hard swap the dagger into their main hand afterwards. That's definitely a pretty cool demonstration of skill, but just not where I'm at yet. And I don't know, my entire approach is kind of just learn what the best people are doing and then slowly incorporate that into my playstyle if I can. And that's kind of just the recommendation that I have for everybody that is trying to get better at PvP, which I would say that's absolutely kind of just one facet of this channel. Is I try to supply some information about what I think is a good approach for different builds or different play styles or just different moments in invasions. And I'm definitely not the best player when it comes to PvP. There are people that have been doing this for a decade and just have quite a bit of skill, but I do try to keep up with what's current, what's good, what's effective, and really learn it and apply it in the process. So this one does kind of start dragging out as the host here is not taking care of the PvE. In instances where PvE is able to hit invaders, I think hosts can be pretty effective at baiting that PvE towards the invaders and getting a decent amount of damage off on the invaders. And at a certain point I just kind of decided that I wasn't really interested in trying to both get Deathblight build up and avoid the giant and just kind of keep enough health. So I just went for the kill at a certain point. And I would say if you can bait your host out of an area where that's going to happen, it's definitely the way to go, or just kind of go for the kill, because you can really just kind of lose invasions in ways that are frustrating if they drag out too long in an area where you can get hit by the PvE. And because the attacks are usually delayed, if you're following a host around, you'll likely be in the place where they were like kind of recently, which means that you're more likely to, you know, get hit by the attacks of the PvE, especially if they're big slow attacks like you'd see from giants, or like those giant hands that can just do so much damage, especially in the mountaintops of the giants. So it's kind of a long rant about how I feel about PvE in specific places, but this next invasion was a 2v1 where I really chased down the Phantom effectively, and then here I really used the iframes of the rolls for the build-up timing, so that host was not taking it they were taking very little damage because they were getting iframes during the attacks, and I was able to blight them. So that was definitely kind of a nice moment in terms of timing and just roll catching appropriately, but it's definitely not always practical. This next invasion was kind of chaotic. There was some PvE involved that was doing a decent amount of damage. Here I get pretty close to death, get my bubble tier procced, and I just really kind of want to take care of this Phantom here, and I am able to guard break them, or the PvE was, I'm not totally sure, but getting the follow-up attack was enough to take them out. And then we do have a host here that I hit them with a dagger right before the PvE attacks, which I'm not sure how PvE and the bubble tier work, but I'm pretty sure it meant they got hit for like around 700 damage just because of the timing of that. So that worked out kind of nicely. And then I did see a hunter get summoned in, so I'm trying to get some blight buildup, but I'm kind of concerned that I'm going to get distracted by the hunter as soon as they come in, and just kind of all the blight buildup that I've acquired on the host is going to be for naught. So I do throw a frost pot there, and then the PvE follows it up with an attack, and they kind of die climbing up the ladder. So you know, I wasn't able to get a blight kill in every one of these instances, but you know, I think it would kind of be a disservice to the weapon itself to only get blight kills, because it's really just not practical to only get kills with the blight buildup. And the damage output is, you know, it is solid. Like, you're not getting the normal approach, which is like high damage also with blood buildup that you associate with curved swords most of the time, like the scavenger sword or something, which has innate bleed buildup, and you know, you can scale that with arcane or something and just get high damage and lots of blood loss given the amount of hits that you get with this. But you know, for being like a split damage with both holy and dexterity scaling, it does a solid damage output. And I didn't find that phantoms were extremely difficult to kill. I've definitely used builds that were more impractical for damage output. I would say the one that I just put out, the poison whips one, I was also pretty worried about, because you know, damage output with whips is pretty low, poise damage is pretty low, and when you're putting the poison infusion on something without, you know, innate poison buildup, you're losing out on some of the scaling that you'd normally get from, you know, say like a keen infusion or a lightning infusion, which is going to give it some extra damage output. So definitely not so much of a struggle as I was expecting, but it was pretty solid. And overall, like, this was a super fun build. I would definitely recommend people give it a try and just kind of see what they can do. It's pretty cool. So I do have 2 more invasions for enjoyment, if you'd like to continue on through the end. So this first one is going to be a 2v1, and you can kind of get an idea about how the host feels about blight buildup just based on their reaction at the end. And then the next one is going to be a one-on-one. That was my first kill with blight, and one that I felt pretty good about, but also kind of, you know, demonstrates the play style that you need for this if you haven't gotten that already, just from the previous invasions. But yeah, I'm gonna let these 2 play out, and then if you want to skip ahead to the outro or just turn off the video, feel free. But I had a ton of fun with this. It was very cool I think, aspect of the game that I had meant to try for a long time and finally got around to doing. So yeah, I hope you have a good one, and thanks so much for watching. As always, if you made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks so much for watching. This particular build was suggested from a viewer comment, so if you do have specific builds that you'd like to see, definitely let me know. This viewer did request Fia's Mist to be involved, but just for my playstyle and the level requirements, I opted to go for just the Eclipse Shuttle, so I hope you don't mind. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with this, and yeah, thanks so much for watching.